"Sir, I think there's been a mistake," the father-in-law said, blocking my path at the reception hall. "This section is reserved for business associates and family members." He looked at my simple dress with obvious disgust. What he didn't know would change everything in about 30 seconds. "Hi, I'm Maya, and I'm 28 years old. 3 months ago, I thought I was just another struggling consultant trying to make ends meet in Chicago. I'd been working insane hours building what everyone assumed was a tiny freelance business while my sister Samantha prepared for her dream wedding to Marcus, whose father owned half the commercial real estate in the city. I wasn't glamorous or wealthy by anyone's standards. I drove a beat-up Honda, lived in a studio apartment, and bought my clothes from discount stores. But here's what my family didn't know. I had something none of them expected: a mind for business and the determination to succeed without their help. While they saw someone who couldn't get her life together, I was quietly building something they'd never imagine. Has your family ever judged you based on appearances? Drop your location in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to hear your story. Hit subscribe if you've ever felt invisible at family events. I thought Samantha's wedding would be a celebration where I could finally relax and enjoy watching my sister marry someone she loved. I had no idea that one conversation with Marcus's father would expose years of assumptions and change our family dynamics forever. The Riverside Country Club sparkled with crystal chandeliers and white roses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Samantha looked radiant in her designer gown, and I was genuinely happy for her as I watched from the back during the ceremony. The reception was where everything went wrong. I was heading toward the family table when Marcus's father, Richard Blackstone, intercepted me. He was a tall man in his 60s, wearing a suit that screamed money and authority. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but firm. "I don't believe we've been introduced. Are you with the catering staff?" "I'm Maya," I said, extending my hand. "Samantha's sister." His expression shifted to barely concealed irritation. "I see. Well, I'm afraid there's been some confusion about the seating arrangements. This area is reserved for our business associates and immediate family." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I am immediate family." Of course," he said with a patronizing smile. "But you understand, we have very important clients here tonight. People expect a certain atmosphere. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the tables in the back?" The humiliation hit like a physical blow. Around us, other guests pretended not to notice, but I could feel their stares. My sister was nowhere to be seen, probably taking photos with the wedding party. "I think you misunderstood," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm the maid of honor." Richard's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "I highly doubt that. The maid of honor is Samantha's sorority sister, Victoria. She's from a very prominent Philadelphia family. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important guests to attend to." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in my simple black dress, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. The worst part wasn't just his dismissal, it was that nobody stepped in to correct him. Not even my own parents, who had witnessed the entire exchange from across the room. That's when I saw Marcus approaching, probably to smooth things over with some empty apology about his father's old-fashioned ways. But what really destroyed me was the look in his eyes, not anger at his father's behavior, but embarrassment that I was causing a scene at his perfect wedding. The moment I'd been dreading finally arrived. I was about to become the family disappointment who ruined Samantha's special day. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't going anywhere, and I definitely wasn't going to stay quiet about who I really was. The first escalation came at dinner. I'd been relegated to a table near the kitchen with distant cousins and plus ones nobody really knew. Richard made a toast where he welcomed Samantha into a family that values excellence and achievement, while pointedly avoiding any mention of her existing family. "Some people," he said with a meaningful glance in my direction, "understand the importance of surrounding ourselves with the right kind of people. Others, well, they'll learn." The clinking of champagne glasses felt like mockery. I watched my parents smile awkwardly, too intimidated to speak up. Samantha beamed at her new father-in-law, completely oblivious to the insult he'd just delivered. The second humiliation happened during the father-daughter dance. When the DJ invited all family members to join in, Richard literally stepped between me and the dance floor. "I think this dance is for people who've actually contributed to making this day special," he said quietly. "Why don't you go get some air?" My own father, who should have defended me, was too busy networking with Richard's friends to notice. My mother gave me a sympathetic look but did nothing. Even Samantha, spinning around in Marcus's arms, seemed oblivious to what was happening. The music swirled around couples dancing in their expensive clothes. I stood at the edge, watching my sister laugh and twirl, feeling like a ghost at my own family's celebration. But the breaking point came during the cake cutting. Richard pulled me aside, his mask of politeness finally slipping completely. "Look," he said, gripping my arm tighter than necessary. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but my family has a reputation to maintain. Samantha's told us all about your situation. The failed business ventures, the financial struggles, the inability to maintain steady employment." "She told you what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We know you've been asking your parents for money. We know about the eviction notices. We know you're basically unemployed." His smile was cruel. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish your meal quietly, congratulate the happy couple, and leave. No dramatic exits, no scenes, just disappear. Marcus deserves better than having his new family associated with someone who can't get their life together." The rage that built in my chest was unlike anything I'd ever felt. 3 years of building my company in secret. 3 years of letting my family believe I was struggling because I didn't want their interference or judgment. 3 years of careful planning and strategic partnerships that had turned my failed freelance business into something they couldn't even imagine. "You think you know everything about me?" I said, my voice steady despite the fury coursing through my veins. "I know enough," Richard sneered. "I run background checks on everyone in my social circle. You rent a studio apartment, drive a car from 2018, and have no significant assets. You're exactly what you appear to be, a charity case." That's when I started laughing. Not hysterically, but with genuine amusement. Richard's confident expression faltered slightly. "Is something funny?" he demanded. "You ran a background check," I said, still smiling, "on Maya Rodriguez." "Of course. Maya Rodriguez, 28, Chicago resident, unemployed consultant. But you didn't run one on Mr. Blackstone Holdings, did you?" The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Behind us, the wedding reception continued, oblivious to the conversation that was about to change everything. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Is it? Because Blackstone Holdings just acquired 3 of your biggest commercial properties last month. And tomorrow morning you're supposed to have a meeting with our representatives about the Morrison Center development project, the one that could save your company from the financial troubles you think nobody knows about." Richard stumbled backward, his hand reaching for the nearest chair. The man who had spent the entire evening treating me like garbage was suddenly looking at me like I was a ghost. "The MR stands for Maya Rodriguez," I said softly. "And Blackstone? Well, I thought it had a nice ring to it. Professional, authoritative, the kind of name that commands respect." "You can't be serious," he breathed. I pulled out my phone and showed him the email chain with his company. His own business logo stared back at him from a contract proposal that would either save his failing empire or destroy it, depending on my decision. "The question isn't whether I'm serious, Richard. The question is whether you still think I'm not good enough to sit at the family table." What Richard and my family didn't understand was that I'd been playing the long game for 3 years. While they pitied my struggling consultant act, I'd been systematically building an empire under their noses. Every family gathering where they asked about my little computer projects was another opportunity to let them underestimate me. The studio apartment? It was a front. I owned a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, but I kept the cheap rental for family visits. The beat-up Honda? My garage held a Tesla and a BMW, but driving them to family events would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. I'd learned early that invisibility was power. When people think you're nobody, they tell you everything. They reveal their weaknesses, their fears, their business strategies. Richard himself had spent last Christmas bragging about his upcoming deals while dismissing my career as cute hobby work. What he didn't know was that I'd been taking notes. Every developer he mentioned, every property deal he discussed, every financial challenge he complained about, it all went into my research files. By the time I was ready to make my move, I knew more about his business than he did. The breakthrough came 6 months ago when I discovered Richard's company was hemorrhaging money due to some bad investments. That's when Blackstone Holdings made its first acquisition, 3 key properties that I bought at auction when his creditors forced the sale. But I didn't stop there. I'd been cultivating relationships with his biggest clients, his suppliers, even his investors. All while sitting at the kids' table at family dinners, listening to him lecture me about applying myself and finding direction in life. The Morrison Center project was my masterpiece. Richard had been pursuing that development deal for 2 years. It was the contract that would either save his company or signal its complete collapse. What he didn't realize was that the property owner, the city planning committee, and the financing partners were all connected to my network now. Tomorrow's meeting wasn't just about business, it was about justice. For every dismissive comment, every condescending look, every time he'd made me feel small and worthless. But tonight, at his son's wedding, I was going to give him a preview of exactly what he was dealing with. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see his face when he realized that the charity case he'd been humiliating all evening held the future of his business empire in her hands. My moment of triumph was interrupted by Marcus himself, who had clearly been sent by his father to handle the situation. Maya, hey. He approached with that politician's smile he'd inherited from Richard. I heard there was some confusion earlier. Dad's just stressed about the wedding, you know. He didn't mean anything by it. I studied Marcus's face, looking for any sign that he might be different from his father. What I found instead was calculation. He knew exactly what kind of man Richard was, but he was choosing to enable it. No confusion on my end, I said calmly. Your father made his position very clear. Look, I know he can come across as protective of the family image, but he's not wrong that tonight is important for business relationships. Marcus glanced around nervously. Maybe we could grab lunch next week? Get to know each other better when there's less pressure? The dismissal was polite but absolute. He was offering me a consolation prize, access to him away from the important people, where my presence wouldn't embarrass anyone. That's when I noticed someone watching our conversation with interest. A woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed, standing alone near the bar. She caught my eye and approached. Excuse me, she said, but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you Maya Rodriguez? Marcus looked confused, but something in the woman's tone made my pulse quicken. I am, I said carefully. She extended her hand with a knowing smile. Catherine Morrison, I believe we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. The blood drained from Marcus's face as the implications hit him. Catherine Morrison as in the Morrison Center project. The deal his father was desperately counting on. I have to say, Catherine continued, when Richard told me his new daughter-in-law's family would be here tonight, I was hoping to meet the mysterious Mr. Blackstone in person. I had no idea you were sitting at the children's table. Marcus opened and closed his mouth like a fish gasping for air. Around us, other guests were beginning to notice the conversation, drawn by Catherine's clear, carrying voice and the look of panic spreading across the groom's face. I was just telling Marcus how much his father values surrounding himself with the right kind of people, I said sweetly. It's going to make tomorrow's conversation so much more interesting. Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, I imagine it will be. Especially when Richard realizes that the charity case he's been avoiding all evening is the person who'll be deciding whether his company survives the year. More guests were gathering now, sensing drama. Samantha appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face confused and worried. My parents pushed through, finally paying attention now that it was too late to fix anything. Maya, my mother hissed, what's going on? That's when Richard appeared, having clearly been summoned by someone. He took one look at me talking to Catherine Morrison and his face went completely white. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and I was about to slice right through it. Catherine, Richard boomed, rushing over with his arms spread wide, desperately trying to regain control of the situation. I didn't know you'd arrived. Let me introduce you to my family. Actually, Catherine said, never taking her eyes off me. Maya was just filling me in on how the evening has been going, quite illuminating. The crowd around us had grown larger, including Samantha, who was now close enough to hear everything. My sister's face showed a mixture of confusion and dawning horror as she began to piece together what was happening. Maya, she whispered, what is she talking about? Richard tried one last desperate play. There seems to be some confusion. This is my daughter-in-law's sister. She's between jobs right now. I'm sure whatever she's told you is completely accurate, Catherine finished firmly. Maya, would you like to clarify for everyone who you really are? The moment I'd been building toward for 3 years had finally arrived. I looked around at the crowd of faces, my parents' confusion, Samantha's growing panic, Marcus's white-knuckled grip on his champagne flute, and Richard's expression of pure terror. My name is Maya Rodriguez, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet reception hall. And I own Blackstone Holdings. The silence was deafening. 3 months ago, my company acquired 3 of Richard's most valuable properties when his creditors forced them to auction. I pulled out my phone, showing the screen to anyone close enough to see. Tomorrow morning I'm supposed to meet with his representatives to discuss the Morrison Center development. a project that represents about 60% of his company's projected revenue for the next 2 years. Richard's face had gone from white to gray. Several guests gasped as the implications sank in. "You can't," Richard started, then stopped. Even he wasn't foolish enough to finish that sentence in front of Catherine Morrison. Samantha stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Maya, I don't understand. You said you were struggling. You said you needed help with rent." "I never said that," I replied calmly. "You assumed it. All of you did. When I told you I was doing freelance consulting, you heard unemployed. When I drove my old car to family dinners, you saw can't afford better. When I lived simply, you saw struggling." My father finally found his voice. "But why didn't you tell us?" I turned to look directly at Richard, my voice cold and clear. "Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I was nobody. And tonight, I got my answer." Marcus stepped forward desperately. "Maya, please. My father didn't mean—" "Your father," I interrupted, "spent the entire evening telling me I wasn't good enough to sit with my own family. He physically blocked me from dancing with my sister. He grabbed my arm and told me to leave because I was embarrassing your family's reputation." The crowd's murmur grew louder. Several people pulled out phones, clearly recording this social media goldmine. Catherine Morrison stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "For those who don't know, Richard's company owes my family's foundation substantial money. The Morrison Center project was supposed to be his way back to solvency." She paused dramatically. "Of course, that was before he insulted my business partner." Richard's legs buckled slightly, and Marcus had to steady him. "The thing is," I continued, "I came here tonight genuinely excited to celebrate Samantha's happiness. I was prepared to let bygones be bygones, maybe even help out with some family financial investments. But then I learned something important about character." I looked directly at Richard, my voice carrying across the silent room. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And you, Richard, showed me exactly who you are when you thought I couldn't fight back." I turned to address Catherine. "I think we should move tomorrow's meeting up. Tonight, actually. My penthouse has an excellent view of the city. We can discuss the Morrison project terms right now." Richard swayed on his feet as his business empire crumbled around him at his own son's wedding reception. I walked away from that reception with my dignity intact, and my family finally understanding who I really was. Catherine and I rescheduled our meeting for Monday, and let's just say the terms became significantly less favorable for Richard's company. Samantha called me the next week, tearful and apologetic. She'd had no idea what Richard was really like, and she was horrified by his behavior. "We're working on rebuilding our relationship, but it's going to take time." My parents struggled with the revelation that they'd completely misjudged their own daughter's success. They've been trying to make amends, but the damage to our trust runs deep. As for Richard, his company survived, barely, but he learned a valuable lesson about making assumptions based on appearances. Every time we see each other now at family events, his silence doesn't hurt me, it validates me. For once in my life, I didn't need anyone's approval or recognition. I had proven myself where it mattered most, to myself. If you've ever been underestimated by family or had to prove your worth to people who should have believed in you from the start, hit that subscribe button right now. Share your story in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from and what moment made you realize your own power. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong. Sometimes it's proving yourself right and walking away from people who never deserved to be in your life anyway. You are enough, exactly as you are.